I don't want to be unfair. I don't want to be unfair. I know a lot of you don't like it, but I'm not on team like she's as bad as Hillary Clinton. I don't personally think she's as bad as Hillary Clinton, but I do think Elizabeth Warren has gotten one of the most free rides in primary history. I mean, other than Barack Obama in 2007 and 2008 when he was a candidate and the slobbering, adoring coverage he got, which, by the way, I was very, very naive back then. I got hoodwinked by Obama like most of you. Other than that slobbering coverage, I've never seen anything like the slobbering coverage Elizabeth Warren has gotten. It's been a little bit more critical in the last 2 weeks, I'd say. You know, since she seems to be like ducking and diving all over the place. She can't just give a straight answer. Can't just give a straight answer on like how you're going to pay for Medicare for all, what's your plan. So there's been a little bit more critical coverage. But other than that, she's got a free ride here. And one of the things, and you know, in fairness, Jen and I have been really busy, so we haven't looked as far into this as we should have. One of the things that really no one has gotten into, and frankly, I think the New York Times deserves a little credit here. She defended as a lawyer a lot of slimy big corporations before she was a senator. So there's a bit of a, before I read some of the story, there's a bit of a conflict here between someone who deserves credit for being the driving force between creating the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and somebody who has said, I've been fighting for consumers and the working class all of my life. There's a conflict there between that and defending Dow Chemical as a lawyer and defending other corporations who have done very, very much harm to vulnerable communities, including women. I won't read the whole article. In 1995, she found herself up against the Clinton administration representing the Cleveland-based conglomerate LTV Steel. Even though LTV had sold off its coal mines during the 1980s, a new law required it to contribute to a health fund for retired coal miners. You know, that health fund, obviously, to their respiratory issues, to their health issues, because coal miners have gotten it almost, I can't think of workers, especially union workers, that have had more health issues. You go to West Virginia, it's Cancer Row, up and down West Virginia with coal-related illnesses. LTV believed that it should not have to pay for those workers' health care. Those claims, the company said, should have been handled as part of its bankruptcy reorganization. Miss Warren's job was to convince the Supreme Court to hear LTV's case, but the court declined. But for Miss Warren, the issue would fester. Over a decade later, it came up in her Senate run, where Scott Brown called her a hired gun who sided against working people. Not that Scott Brown is such a big working class hero. The LTV case was a part of a considerable body of legal work that Warren, one of the nation's leading bankruptcy experts, took on while working as a law professor, moonlighting that earned her hundreds of thousands of dollars over roughly 2 decades beginning in the late 1980s, mostly while she was on the faculty at Harvard. Much of it involved representing big corporate clients. Against the backdrop, some of Ms. Warren's critics have seized upon her bankruptcy work for LTV and other big corporations to question the depth of her progressive bona fides. I want to get to some others. Among her corporate clients were Travelers Insurance and the aircraft maker Fairchild, as well as one of America's wealthiest families, the Hunts of Texas. She advocated for a railroad company that wanted to avoid paying for a Superfund cleanup, and advised Dow Chemical as its subsidiary, Dow Corning, dealt with thousands of complaints from women who said they had been harmed by Dow Chemical's silicone breast implants. But she also worked on a number of cases involving consumer bankruptcy and victims' rights in asbestos litigation, serving as an expert in a lawsuit against the cigarette maker Philip Morris, and represented the lawyer whose battles with polluters inspired the film A Civil Action. In a very brief and simplified summaries, the list casts much of her work, even for corporate clients, in terms that align with her pro-consumer narrative, but those descriptions have themselves become a focus of some contention. And to tell you the truth, I think the New York Times needs to get a little bit more informed, because, Jen, if you want to find it for me, I've read some articles that Elizabeth Warren's work on behalf of asbestos, in terms of companies with being sued for asbestos, was not so charitable. So, I got to tell you, I'm not saying this disqualifies her, but when put up against Bernie Sanders, I could tell you what Bernie Sanders was doing in the 1980s and 90s. It was not representing Dow Chemical, who, in addition, I don't know much about this breast implant case, to be honest with you, but in addition, has been trying to push for deregulation of very, very harmful pesticides, which The Intercept has done great reporting on. Dow Chemical is not a friend of the environment. And by the way, when they're talking about her defending a railroad company that was going through a Superfund site, I have been on the front lines at Superfund sites. From Flint to East Chicago, Indiana, this is where they dump the most toxic projects possible in poor black, poor brown, poor indigenous communities. And Elizabeth Warren was working to defend a railroad company's rights to go through that, as well as, what did the New York Times say here? This is from the Boston Globe. 6 months after Elizabeth Warren arrived in Washington to work as an advisor to Congress, she experienced another career milestone in the nation's capital, a seat at the U.S. Supreme Court's Mahogany Council table. The 2009 appearance was the only time Warren helped represent a party before the nation's highest court, and it provides a rare window into a less heralded aspect of the Harvard law professor's career, her time as a working attorney in the courts. The case, Travelers vs. Bailey, was remarkable in many respects. It was sprawling and complicated, involving dozens of lawyers, thousands of asbestos victims, and nearly 3 decades of court battles that still have not ended. It was also notable because Warren, who has gained fame for defending consumers against big business, was in this case working on behalf of a big business. For her contribution, Warren was paid $212,000 over 3 years by Travelers, the nation's largest insurer. Travelers was fighting to gain permanent immunity from asbestos-related lawsuits by establishing a $500 million trust. The trust would have been divided among current and future victims of asbestos poisoning who had claims against the nation's largest asbestos manufacturer, Johns Manville, which has been insured by Travelers before it went bankrupt. Travelers won most of what it wanted from the Supreme Court, and in doing so, Warren helped preserve an element of bankruptcy law that ensured that victims of large-scale corporate malfeasance would have a better chance of getting compensated even when the responsible companies go bankrupt. But after Warren left the case, it continued to twist and turn through the legal system, leaving a result that has been disastrous for asbestos victims. Travelers, in part because of its Supreme Court victory, has held on to its immunity for most lawsuits. So basically, this as part of Mountain Valley Pipeline, Governor Terry McAuliffe, BFF to Bill and Hillary Clinton. You know Terry McAuliffe? He was the governor of Virginia. He made a backroom deal. He made a backroom deal in the final year of his governorship there in Virginia with the Mountain Valley Pipeline Company. And that background deal was they would pay X amount of money now towards whatever, if something happens with the pipeline. They'd pay up front. Jen, you'd have to check me on this. I think it was $50 something million that the company would pay. And that money up front would then make them immune to any other damages if the pipeline explodes or if there's a problem with the pipeline. So basically, that's milk money to this pipeline company. They got to pay, I think it was $56 million, if my memory serves me correct, up front. That would go into basically a pool if something goes wrong with the pipelines for victims. But past that $56 million, they're off the hook. So I tell you that example because that's basically what Elizabeth Warren, she wasn't the only lawyer, obviously, for Travelers, but that's basically what she was able to do, representing Travelers, where, all right, we'll put some money forward now for asbestos victims, but we get immunity past that. So it's essentially, we'll pay a little bit up front and save a whole lot now. Again, I'm not personally saying this disqualifies her. You know, it wasn't 5 years ago, it was 15 to 20 years ago. But it says something about the kind of person you are. She, as far as I know, she was a Harvard professor, I believe. So you would have to think she might not be rich, but she wasn't poor as a Harvard professor. So then you make the argument, well, she had to support her kids and whatever, and there was a lot of money here for her to make. Well, can't you make decent money as a Harvard professor, a lawyer? Elizabeth Warren, say what you want. She's a brilliant woman. Very, very smart woman. Couldn't you have made money doing more uplifting things, representing more vulnerable people, rather than companies causing asbestos, Dow Chemical causing health issues for women with breast implants, and the other company mentioned in the New York Times? So, again, this is just one part of her background that has not been ever brought up in a debate, has not ever been brought up by other candidates. Why? Why is it that the New York Times is sitting there grilling Bernie Sanders about a rally he went to in Nicaragua? Because he was at a rally in Nicaragua and there was some anti-American chants. Did you hear those anti-American chants? Mind you, the Contras were murdering the people of Nicaragua, but they were pressing Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is scrutinized, criticized for every little thing, down to his praise of Fidel Castro. Elizabeth Warren represented, frankly, in some cases, corporate criminals. Dow Chemical, look into them. They are as corporate criminal as you could find. Again, in fairness, good on the New York Times for talking about this. They misrepresented the asbestos thing. They wrote it as a positive thing. It wasn't. She basically helped travelers basically fork over less money for the victims so that they could get immunity, because they knew there's a lot more victims here. Let's fork over this money now so we get immunity for the much larger liability. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.